Okay, thank you all for your patience. I think I'm going to go ahead and slowly start here. So we still have a few people joining us, but good morning. Thank you for joining us today. You are here for our webinar on the Regional K-16 Education Collaboratives Grant Program. My name is Barbara Kampminer. I'm the Deputy Executive Officer of the Office of Public School Construction. The Office of Public School Construction is the office under the Department of General Services that is charged with administering this program. We also will be hearing mostly today from Foundation for California Community Colleges. Foundation CCC is the third-party administrator that has been selected to administer the program with OPSC. So we'll be hearing from several FCCC members today. So that is the plan. And then let's see, Liz, if you could switch the slide for us, please. Thank you. So just a some brief housekeeping items. So we are in a Zoom webinar format today. So if you have questions, if you could please put them in the Q&A section. What we are planning today is we'll have a brief overview of the program for those of you that may be new to this grant opportunity. So we'll be talking a little bit about the purpose of the program, some of the requirements of applicants, the responsibilities, and we'll be talking about awards in general. And then we are going to dive into what we're calling our phase one piece of the application process. So this is going to be specific to groups that want to apply for this grant program. The application period is open now. So we will have more information to come on our second phase of applications later on. One of the nice things today, we will see a demo of the tool that will be used to submit your application online. So that's very exciting today. And then also at the end, we will have a few minutes for questions. We can still keep those in the Q&A section, and then also we can use the raise hand feature. If we do not get to all of the questions today, don't worry, we will put them on an FAQ document that is going, that actually lives on the program website right now, and we will be adding to that as we get more questions. So we'll try to answer as many as we can today. But if not, we will get them on that FAQ document. And then also just a few other things to note. We will be dropping the PowerPoint presentation link in the chat, and then also we'll add the link to the FAQ document in the chat as well. So I think we may have touched on that already, but in case you were joining us while we were putting that in there, we're going to add those links. And with that, I am actually going to pass it over to Beth Kay with Foundation CCC to take us through the next part of our agenda. Thank you.
Great. Good morning, everyone. So the next few slides are really just reminders. Hopefully all of you, if not most of you, who are on this webinar were on the original webinar discussing these next slides. So we're going to go through them pretty quickly. Make sure you do put your questions in the chat if you happen to have them. I think we've also dropped the link already for the, maybe we haven't quite yet, the link for the FAQ area on the website. So if you have any questions at all, many of them could be found in that area. So the purpose of this grant program, it is competitive. It is intended to support the regional K-16 educational collaboratives. And the intent is to create streamlined pathways all the way from high school through post-secondary and into the workforce. There are very specific required qualifications of each of the collaboratives in the application process for sure, but this is in the language that is in the Budget Act. So each collaborative needs to include at least one K-12 district, at least one University of California campus, at least one California State University campus, and at least one California Community College district. Each of the collaboratives needs to establish a steering committee with at least 25% local employers, and they need to commit to participate in the California Cradle to Career system. Slide. So in addition to starting pathways, each must use 4 of the following 7 recommendations in the processes they use to develop this work. And these come from the Recovery with Equity report. That's also linked on our website. So just to note these very specifically, they are in the application, they are linked on our website, but it is important that your collaborative understands each of these. So you can choose to improve faculty, staff, and administrator diversity, cultivate inclusive, engaging, and equity-oriented learning environments. You can retain students through inclusive supports. You can provide high-tech, high-touch advising. You can support college preparation and early credit. You can subsidize internet access for eligible students, and you can improve college affordability. And the intention of these is to not just, right, this is to connect the building of pathways with the intention of recovery with equity for every region across the state. Next slide, please. So each of the collaboratives also needs to create accelerated degree or credential programs that incorporate work-based learning in at least 2 of the following sectors based on your regional needs. So we're in the application, we're intending to see some sort of assessment of what your region needs. So you're going to be choosing at least 2 from this list: healthcare, education, business management, or engineering or computing. So I want to say something about the work-based learning. We haven't spoken a lot about that, but it is an intended part of building these pathways and credential programs. Next. So in addition to these expected pathways and choosing these strategies from the report with equity, Recovery with Equity report, each of the collaboratives are expected to regularly track and report on progress as a part of the grant agreement. The collaboratives will be expected to participate in evaluation activities, including specific data reporting and case studies, as well as participate in the site visits from the program administrator and technical assistance activities. Next, thanks. So I think this might be my last slide. We want to reiterate these last bullets. So there will be up to 13 awards, 1 intended for each SURF region. If you're interested in the SURF regions, they are linked on our website in the resources section. The amount of the award will be based on the size and scope of the applicant's plans. In this phase 1 set of grants, each will be up to 20 million. And the funds dispersed will be 40% the first year and 20% for each subsequent year based on progress toward goals. Next. Okay, so I think I'm still doing this slide, Jody.
I can take this one if you'd like, Beth.
Okay. I'm going to introduce my partner in crime here, Jody Samuel. She's also with the foundation. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you, Beth. And one thing too, just to clarify from the last slide in terms of the number of awards, that is across the entire project. So that includes phase 1 and phase 2. So just to clarify, so what we're going over today is really specific to phase 1 in terms of the project timeline and also looking at the application. So for phase 1, this is really intended for well-established collaborators that already include all of the required partners. And we have gotten a lot of questions about how to determine if phase 1 is appropriate for your collaborative. And on the K-16 collaborative website, we provide a tool, a self-assessment tool, to help you make that determination. So it's a series of questions, sort of a checklist, to help you sort of evaluate the maturity of your collaborative and determine if phase 1 is the appropriate timing for you. And if it's not, then we will have phase 2 as well. And information about that is also on the website. So for phase 1, the application deadline is May 2nd. We anticipate that awards will be announced on May 20th. And for phase one, these are the milestones that need to be achieved. So by June 30th of 2024, collaboratives will need to implement 2 of the target recovery with equity report recommendations and fully establish 1 occupational pathway. They also will need to demonstrate progress toward the other recommendations and pathway. And then by the end of the project period, which is June 30th, 2026, the collaboratives need to fully implement all 4 target recovery with equity report recommendations that they have identified as the priorities for their collaborative and fully implement the minimum of those 2 occupational pathways. Next slide. So we wanted to make sure that you all are familiar with the resources that are available to you. So in the chat, we do have the link to the K-16 website, and there is a page for that website that is specific to this phase 1 RFP. I'm going to go to that in just a moment, but just to let you know, the resources available to you on that page include the application guidelines. We also provide an application template. So this is a Word document that includes all of the questions that will be on the online application, so that you can use this Word document to prepare your proposal and your application, and then copy and paste that information into the online platform. It's just a much easier way to start developing your proposal, especially when you're working with multiple partners. There's also a budget spreadsheet template that you will need to download, and that will be uploaded into the online platform. There is a link to Submittable, which is the online platform that everyone will need to use to apply. And then also this webinar presentation, the slide deck is already posted on that webpage. And once we have the recording link, we will post that as well. So now I'd like to actually go to the website to show you what that looks like. So Liz, if I would be able to share my screen, that would be great. Okay, so this is our K-16 website. This is the homepage that I'm on right now. And as you can see, there is a section here at the top for phase 1. And this is where we are compiling all of the information specific to this phase 1 application. So if you click here, again, it shows you this is for phase 1 collaborative. It talks about how to qualify. And then again, it includes a link to the self-assessment checklist. And so I'll just show that briefly. So again, this is a PDF that each collaborative can use to help determine or evaluate sort of the experience of the collaborative and if it really feels ready to apply for phase 1. These are not necessarily requirements. These are just strong encouragements and recommendations about the type of collaborative that is ready to apply now and is really ready to hit the ground running. Other information on the website includes the process and key dates. So we did launch the grant application last Friday. Obviously, we're having the webinar today, and proposals are due May 2nd, as I mentioned. We will obviously be updating this part because you won't need to register for this webinar anymore, and then the slides for the webinar can be downloaded here. We also have included additional information here, just as a reminder about the phase 1 grantee benchmarks in terms of those timelines and milestones that the phase 1 grantees will be expected to meet. And then the other resources available here for you are the ones I mentioned before under this section, Apply. So there is the phase 1 application template. If you click on this, it will download that Word document that you will be able to use to help develop your proposal. The application guidelines here will download a PDF document that includes all of the information about the application, information about the different sections, as well as some information about the reporting expectations. And one thing to keep in mind as well is some of those other administrative details like the reporting or the sort of expectations for audit or evaluation. Some of those will be outlined in more detail in the grant agreement that collaboratives will end up signing and entering into with OPSC. So there will be some of that is more explicitly laid out in the grant agreement. This next button is for the budget template and instructions. This is an Excel spreadsheet, and you will need to download this and fill it out and then upload it into your online application. And then once you are ready to apply, you can click here and this click to apply link. And this will take you directly to Submittable, which is Foundation CCC's online platform for grant applications. So it will lead you directly to this page. And I'm going to walk through this just a little bit to show a little bit of the Submittable interface if people aren't familiar with it yet. So this is called, like I said, it's a submission portal. This first information here talks about just how to use the portal. It also includes several links to Help Center, the submittable Help Center, as well as information about how to get started as a submitter, or if you need to submit any technical requests to Submittable. If you're having difficulties, we have a lot of links here as well to make it very easy for you. You will need to create a Submittable account in order to submit this proposal online. And one of the things to keep in mind is that there is one designated submitter per application. However, if you want to invite other people to help collaborate on your application, you are able to do that by clicking right here, Add Collaborators. And this will give you instructions about how to go about doing that. So that's an important part to keep in mind as well, is that you most likely will want to add some other collaborators, especially because usually there's more than one person who's really working on this, but there will be one person who is the designated submitter. So keep that in mind when you're making that decision. All right, and I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment so that I can actually sign in and show a little bit more of what the application looks like. On just a moment. And one thing to keep in mind with the application is that there is quite a bit of scrolling that you will need to do in the form, in the online form. And that's the other reason why we always provide that Word document template, so it makes it easier for you to actually see what will be required when you enter the online form, so that you're not seeing that for the first time when you're trying to actually enter in all the information. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again here and show that. Okay, so now I've actually logged into Submittable, and you can see it has the same instructions here on the first page. There's also a link right up at the top here to make it very easy to invite collaborators. And then this is the entire proposal. And like I said, you do need to scroll down. So Submittable does, unlike some other online portals, does not have sort of like separate pages for each part of the application. Instead, you'll start with section 1. And again, this is reflected in the Word template that's available for you. Everything that is a required response has an asterisk next to it. For a few of them, there is a limit in terms of the number of characters that you can utilize, but for most of them, it's unlimited, especially for the narrative questions. And then there are a couple of items where you will select from a drop-down menu. So for example, for the surf region, you will select from a drop-down menu. And then for the occupational pathways, you will select at least 2 that you plan to develop. And recovery with equity recommendations, you will select the 4 that you plan to address. And then there's a lot of sort of what you would expect: lead applicant, organization name, all of that sort of contact information. And similarly for all of the required partners. So section 2 is the application contact information. So it's exactly what it sounds like, who the primary contact is for the application. You can add a secondary contact if you'd like. If you click yes here, it will pop open some additional fields. If you click no, it will remove those fields. So you're only answering when you need to. Section 3 is where you will list all of your required collaborative partners. And this in particular is those 4 higher education entities that are required within the statutory language for this program. So the K-12 school district, there will also be the California Community College District, the CSU, and then also the UC. So this is all the required partners information that you'll be entering in here. Section 4 gets really into I would say the most significant information that will be provided in the proposal, and this is the proposal narrative. So this is a series of questions, again, that is included also on the Word document, that template, where you're really going to be telling us about your collaborative, about the history and strengths, about the qualifications and governance, the service to the surf region, how you already are integrated there. And then also, what is the need you're trying to address? What is the problem that you've identified? What are the needs of the region? Including data is very helpful here as well. Keep in mind that the reviewers who will be reading these proposals may or may not be familiar with your specific specifically with your region or with your work. So keep that in mind as well when you're developing your application, to make sure that you're really telling the story that you want to tell, and making sure that you're expressing what your collaborative project is and how you're going to achieve those goals. There is a section on overarching goals, and then there are sections for developing pathways, as well as for implementing the recovery with equity recommendations. We also do have a question around sustainability in terms of how these efforts will be continued beyond the grant project period. As we mentioned before, there is a very important utilization of data that will be required for the collaborative. So there's a question around the strategic and operational use of data, as well as a more specific question about participation in the California Cradle to Career data system. If your collaborative or some members of your collaborative are already participating in this, it would be helpful to upload some reports to show that, and there's an opportunity to do that right here, to upload those reports. Not required. You can see this does not have an asterisk, so that's only if it's appropriate and applicable for your collaborative. For the budget narrative, this is where you will complement or supplement what is in that spreadsheet. So as I mentioned, there is the budget spreadsheet that is a required attachment here. And then this budget narrative is an opportunity to really expand upon that spreadsheet. In the spreadsheet itself, there's a very small amount of space available for each budget line item to just briefly summarize what each line item is for. But what the readers will be looking for here is a better and clearer understanding of exactly how you're going to utilize these funds, how the funds will be allocated across the different categories, how the funds will be dispersed over the 5-year period, and really just more information about exactly how these funds will be utilized to achieve the project goals. The budget spreadsheet will be uploaded right here. And then the other required attachments are that you do need a signed memorandum of understanding or letter of commitment from each of the collaborative partners, at a minimum from each of those 4 required educational entities. So all of those MOUs or letters of commitment are going to be uploaded right here. And you can see you can upload up to 74 files, so that should be sufficient. And then lastly, what we will need as part of the application is a list of collaborative partners. So that would be a list of collaborative partners, including each organization's name and primary contact. We didn't provide a specific template for that, so that can be provided in whatever format is easiest for you. But we do want to make sure that we have a list of all of the collaborative partners as well. And something to keep in mind with Submittable that's very helpful is that the form will save automatically as you are completing it. You also, when you get to the bottom, can click Save Draft if you're not quite ready to apply. And then once you are ready to apply and you've completed everything and you're satisfied that everything is correct, then you will click on this button, Apply, and that will submit the application through Submittable. You will get an immediate notification that it was submitted, and then also our team will be notified when those applications were submitted. So if you're ever not sure, if you think you submitted but you're not positive, you can always send an email to K16collaborative@foundationccc.org just to verify that the application was indeed received. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now. And Liz, if we could go back to the presentation, that would be great, just to wrap things up a little bit. Okay, next slide, please. So this is, again, just really going over what I just provided as a demonstration in terms of how to apply. So like I mentioned, our platform is called Submittable. All applications must be submitted electronically through this online platform. You will need to create an account for the primary submitter, and you can add multiple collaborators for other folks who will be working on the application. This also includes links to the Submittable Technical Support and Help Center. And as I mentioned, you can save the draft while in progress and then click Apply when you are ready to submit. Next slide, please. The application sections, I did scroll through them, but it might have been a little fast, and depending on what type of device you're using to watch this. So I'll just confirm again, there are 4 sections to the application. There's the application cover page, which has some of the basic information about the project. There is the application contact information, the required collaborative partners contact information, and then section 4, which is the proposal narrative. And that's a series of 10 questions that you will be responding to. There's also a section for those required attachments. So there are 3 required attachments: the budget spreadsheet, the MOUs and or letters of commitment, and also a list of collaborative partners. Next slide. So really that wraps everything up in terms of a walkthrough of the resources that are available to you on the website, as well as what the online platform looks like. Barbara also mentioned the FAQs that are available on the website, and that is on our website under the resources tab. We currently have a series of FAQs that have been developed based on questions we've received thus far about the program. And as we receive additional questions, in particular about this phase 1 grant application, we will be updating those FAQs on a regular basis. So definitely be sure to check those out. And I think now we obviously have some time for questions. So I know that some of them have been answered as we've gone along, but let's see. I think there's
we want to start with a couple technical questions. We had some questions about character limits and if the application can be saved and submittable and returned to a later date.
Yes. So yes, in terms of the character limits, the only question right now that is set with a character limit is the project summary, and that is 500 characters. The remainder of those proposal narrative questions do not have any character limit. And in terms of saving the application, yes, you can save the draft in submittable, and then when you log back in, you can return to it.
A few more from a application standpoint. Is there a requirement as to who the designated submitter needs to be?
There's no requirement. It really just depends on what makes the most sense for your collaborative. Keep in mind, though, that the primary submitter who creates the account, that person's email will be tied to the account and to the application. So that person will always be the one to get all of the automated notifications. If at a later time you need to change that primary contact or change the email associated with the account or the application, it is possible to do that by reaching out to Submittable Technical Support.
Can non-required partners be included post-award and throughout the timeline of the grant?
That's a question I don't think we've had before, but I'm looking to Beth and Barbara on that one. I would, if non-required partners, I would think could be included anytime as is appropriate and applicable to the work of the collaborative and the project activities, but just to confirm with Beth and Barbara as well.
Yeah, I don't see any issue with that.
I think it was what you said at the tail end of that was key though, Jody. So it should be tied to the grant proposal that the collaborative has put forward. So the funding should be used as something that you've proposed as part of your overall plan.
Two related questions. Is there a specific rubric or scoring criteria that the K-16 evaluators will be using that the applicants can refer to as they create their application? And is there a minimum point threshold that must be achieved?
I will answer the second one first, actually. There is not a minimum point threshold that we have established. In terms of the rubric, that is actually included in the application guidelines. So I think it's I think it might be the final section of the application guidelines. We have included the entire rubric that the readers will be looking at, will be asked to respond to as they are evaluating the applications. So yes, if you want to sort of write your application with that in mind, which is often a really good strategy, all of that information is included in the application guidelines.
I think there was a follow-on question to that as to whether if we, for example, got an application in all 13 regions for phase 1, does that mean that there is no phase 2 essentially? And while there is no minimum point threshold, we do want to ensure that the phase 1 applications are strong grant applications. So if we receive an application that doesn't appear to be meeting minimum criteria or have the strength to be participating at this point, we will be encouraging applicants to go for the phase 2 award. So it is not likely that all 13 regions will be awarded in phase 1. We're not expecting that at this time.
And I'm seeing a question also about, can you provide either through the website or through submittable a PDF or Word document of the online application so the group of collaborating organizations can jointly work on the components? And so yes, just to reiterate, on the website, on the Phase 1 RFP page, there is a Word document that can be downloaded that is a template of the online application so that you are able to work collaboratively to develop that application before working directly in the online portal.
Can images, live links, data tables, etc., be added to the narrative section, or is there a place to add other attachments, as copies of bylaws and other evidence?
We don't currently have a way to do that. In terms of the narrative sections, you should be able to include links. I don't believe they will be live, but you certainly could include URLs if necessary that readers could then consult as they're doing the evaluation. Images cannot be uploaded to the narrative parts at that. And then in terms of other attachments, we do not have a place for other attachments. I think if you feel like there's some other attachment that is particularly important that you want to be able to share, if you could email us at k16collaborative@foundationccc.org to let us know, we could potentially look at adding another section to the application if necessary, or we could determine sort of on a case-by-case basis if that additional application would be relevant or necessary for the proposal. There's a question here about the budget template that I'm seeing about an indirect rate. Is there an indirect rate clearly indicated on the budget template? Yes, there is. The budget template indicates there is a potential of what the indirect rate is for the entire project. So please consult the budget template for that information.
I've seen this question more than once. Will budget amendments be allowed post-award announcement?
I would say that that's going to be a bit of a challenge depending on what we're trying to do with the budget, because this is a finite amount of funding. So we do expect to award all of the funds. There won't be an opportunity to increase the budget because there won't be any money for it, unfortunately. So I would say try to get pretty close with what your estimates are, and then I would expect that the budget is what it is, although if there is a reason to decrease the budget because your scope is changing, that's something that we would have to talk about. We would want to make sure, of course, that any changes to the budget didn't impact the overall proposal and the scoring that was tied to the proposal. So those are initial thoughts there, but as of right now, we're only dealing with the limited amount of funding, so we would be capped at the original award amount that is provided.
There is a question about pointing out any changes or clarifications that have come about since the RFA was released. And just to confirm, there haven't been any changes. The RFA that was released last Friday is still the same as it is now, and we do not anticipate making any changes.
This question has come up more than once. It's also in our FAQs on the website. Can more than one application be funded per region if still under the award cap? The intention is for one award to be given per SURF region. And that's through all, just for clarification, that's through all the phases. So phase 1 and phase 2, there will only be a single award per region. Is everyone on the steering committee considered a partner? I would answer that yes. Every organization that's a member of the steering committee. And so an MOU or a letter of commitment would be needed from their organization, yes. But there are only 4 required ones, right? The educational partners. And the 25% local. let's see.
I see a question in there about the FAQ document. I'll go ahead and drop that link in the chat again.
Thank you, Barbara.
I think we've answered quite a number of these. I'm looking through the chat questions right now.
Okay. There's a question in the Q&A, and I think we may have addressed this. I don't remember if it's on the FAQs, but it's a question about, is it acceptable for county offices of education to submit a letter of commitment to represent all school districts within their county, rather than letters from each of the school districts? Or will we need letters of commitment from each K-12 school district wishing to participate?
So what we said in the FAQs, and just for clarity, is that a county office of education can represent the required K-12 district that's listed as a required partner. But we don't want the county office to represent all school districts. Each school district that would participate and be a partner would submit their own MOU or letter of commitment.
And there's a question clarifying the number of project years. Are there 4 or 5 project years? And Barbara, I'm going to look to you just to confirm. I believe it's a total of 4 overall.
Yeah, I think we have our, let me pull the timelines real quick.
Yeah. I know that the final milestones need to be completed by June 30th, 2026. So that would be basically 4 years. Right.
Right. We need to wrap up the expenditures or have a plan for that at the end.
Yeah.
This question says we'd like clarity around the definition of what a local industry, local employer means. We're assuming it could be government-related public and nonprofit sectors because of the vast majority of employers in the North State. Is that correct? Yes, we have not defined employer as private industry, but as stated before, the intention is that the local employers in the steering committee represent in some way the pathways that have been chosen to work on.
There's also a question, I think, that's trying to distinguish between an MOU and a letter of commitment. So the question cites what's in the application. At a minimum, include an MOU from each of the 4 required educational entities. Are we correct that this could also be a letter of commitment? I'll take a stab at answering that, and then Beth or Barbara also chime in, please. We consider an MOU to be a stronger agreement, a binding agreement among those 4 partners that are required as part of the collaborative. A letter of commitment sometimes doesn't have all of those details laid out in terms of roles and responsibilities, or clarify how those 4 required entities are involved in the overall governance and administration of the collaborative. So that is why we use the term MOU for those 4 required educational entities. And then for other members of the collaborative, including those who might be on the steering committee, a letter of commitment would be sufficient. But I also want to just confirm that with Beth and Barbara.
That's absolutely an accurate statement to all that we've discussed. Middle schools are not a required partner. I'm responding to a question that said, would a middle school grade 6 to 8 single district qualify to participate? There's no other statements about who's qualified to participate except what the required partners are. So if in fact there's a partner that can support the development of a pathway using some of the strategies listed in the report, the Recovery with Equity report, then there's nothing that prevents them from participating. That's a decision of the collaborative, not us. Can a collaborative include partners who are involved in the region, but outside the region? I'm not sure I actually understand the question. I thought I did when I first read it. There's a lot of response. Sorry, there's a lot of discussion in the Q&A or in the FAQs on the website about UC participation and who can participate in the collaboratives, if you want to take a look at all of those. Sorry, were you saying something, Jim?
No, I think it was just, it seemed to be even more specific just to the issue of the UC. And we do have some information in the FAQs about that because we understand that there is not necessarily a UC campus in each of those SURF regions. So that is something that is addressed in the FAQs. There's also a budget question, and for this one, I may turn to Barbara. Can the budget be revised to keep the same total, but reallocate funds as necessary during the progress of the grant?
I think that's something that we can consider, but again, it needs to not impact the scoring. So if it's a major change from the proposal, part of the scoring does tie into the budget reasonableness and those factors. So we'll want to make sure that any changes to the budget or reallocation within the budget are still meeting with the original intent of what the collaborative is proposing to accomplish with the funds. Yeah. So I think that's kind of the general thought process on that at the current moment. We'd want to take a look at the specific changes that were being proposed just to make sure that everything is still in keeping with the grant requirements. And that also ties into another question that I saw through the Q&A that asked about how to propose the budget for the application with potentially some lump sums or reserved pots for future expenses. So that is something that you're probably going to want to narrow down a little bit more for the application, since it is a piece that readers are looking at to determine how that ties in with the overall plan. And so I would recommend that you try to get the bucket down from one large bucket to something a little more specific in your budget proposal.
And it looks as though we may have someone who has a hand raised. Do we want to go ahead and address that question?
Yeah, we can do that.
Looks like it's Elizabeth Wade.
Yeah, this is a question about employers. So if one of our pathways is education, can school districts or county offices of education be considered employers for the purposes of this grant?
Yes. Looks like we're getting a lot of raised hands. I want to make sure before we address too many of the other raised hands that we actually go through the questions that were submitted earlier and make sure either we answer them or know that they're answered in the FAQs, if we can.
Yeah. There's a question about what is the best way to add required partners on the application that want to be included, or how can add on to the application itself to reflect more than the required for. So just to reiterate, the application itself does require information from those required for. There are fields that need to be completed. In terms of adding partners to help work on the application, that would be adding collaborators in submittable, if that's part of the question. I'm not entirely sure. And then in terms of reflecting more than the required for, that would be included on that required attachment, which is a list of all of the collaborative partners.
A couple data related questions in there, and that's a bit of a more to come answer. We recognize that each of the regions and the collaboratives that are moving forward with these grants are potentially going to have some different goals. So part of the goal with the data is to make sure that we're evaluating program outcomes for each of the collaboratives. Ideally, yes, we would like to be able to look at some of this across the regions to see how things are going, but everybody is not necessarily pursuing the same goals. So it might not be the same data points that need to be collected. What we have in the application documents talking about data is more aimed at what the individual collaborative that's applying is, how data is being used within that collaborative, and what the proposal is for the future on that. But the specifics on collecting data, that's going to be included more in the grant agreement. So there will be a little bit more detail in that piece of it. Hopefully that hopefully that addresses those, but there will be more to come as we get further into this grant process, just because it's not possible to lay out the data points at this current moment because we don't know what everyone's proposing to do at this point.
I'm seeing a series of questions in the Q&A that seem to express some concerns about MOUs. In particular, if the MOUs are not already existing among the required partners and the time it can take sometimes to get an MOU, depending on who needs to approve and authorize that. Wondering, that is obviously a concern for several folks, it looks like. And questioning about, is it possible to submit letters of commitment now and then include how there is a plan to get the MOUs signed? So I don't know, Beth or Barbara, if either of you have thoughts on that one.
I think part of this was really about acknowledging truly mature collaboratives.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Excuse me? Sorry, whoever is speaking, can you mute yourself? So the intent of the MOU really is so that these partners that are at the table, the 4 required partners, have had the conversations about what the roles and responsibilities will be, specifically around strategy, implementation, use of funds, all of those things that are really important to the long-term sustainability of a collaborative. And we recognize that it does take a while to get signatures sometimes in some of these organizations. But phase 1 applications are intended to be from mature collaboratives. And so we imagined that these would be MOUs that were either already in place or certainly going through the process. Okay, I'm seeing something. MOUs are impossible in 1 month, even when we have mature collaboratives. Letters.
It might be helpful to talk about the phase 2 timelines a little bit, just
Sure.
Because
yeah,
it's not too far away, so that might help
Yes.
with some of the concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. I can do that briefly. So we do have phase 2, and there's actually 2 parts to phase 2. There is a phase 2 planning grant and then a phase 2 implementation grant. And the phase 2 planning grants, those will be launched in October of this year. And those will be for 1-year planning grants, obviously a smaller amount than the implementation grant. And then the phase 2 implementation grants will be launched in October of 2023. So if there are collaboratives that are not as well established, or if there are collaboratives that can't meet all of the eligibility criteria for phase 1 or have concerns about submitting the proposal with all of the required pieces, there is an opportunity to apply in this October for a planning grant, and then the following October for an implementation grant. So we recognize that this is a very accelerated timeline, and that is one of the reasons why we did provide also that self-assessment checklist to try to really help potential applicants determine if they're ready to apply now, or if it makes more sense to wait until phase 2 of the project.
Just adding on a little bit to that. So that was the goal of it. We recognize that there are definitely it's a large range of readiness for this grant, but we want to ensure that these collaborations are strong and you're working together for years on this project. So we felt it was better to have a 2-step process. So immediately address funding needs for people that are ready to go have this in place and have the opportunity to move forward, but make sure that it is a very thoughtful step for folks that are still in the formation stage or in the growth stage of their collaboratives and will be applying. So we didn't want people to rush if you weren't ready. And so that's what led to the concept of a phase 1 and a phase 2 application process. So it's not a bad thing to be a phase 2 applicant. It's probably better to make sure that you've got everything in alignment and in place, because it's a long commitment, several years. So you want to make sure that piece has time to develop. And that was the thought behind the second phase. So hopefully that helps a little bit. with giving everyone some comfort that there is time to put these things together thoughtfully. You don't have to race to your boards and get everything signed without them having a deeper understanding of what's going on, and that the funding is still there.
And also, I do want to clarify, there was a sort of a follow-up question around the MOUs saying, am I hearing you correct that you only want those that are signing MOUs on the spreadsheet of collaborative partners that we attach? No, that is not correct. On that spreadsheet of collaborative partners that is required as part of the application, we want that to include all of your partners. So we are asking for at least the MOUs from the 4 required educational entities, but then the additional required attachment should include a list of all of your collaborative partners.
And just again, for clarification, if you apply for phase 1 and are not awarded, you can apply in phase 2. This is a good question about the MOUs. Again, do the MOUs need to be specifically mention the work of the K-16 collaborative, or can they be existing MOUs we have for our collaborative? Additionally, we can use data sharing agreements we have with our K-12 partners as this MOU. Data sharing agreements don't cover roles and responsibilities for the scope of the work that's outlined here, but I do think that prior MOUs may be legitimate in this case, and that's the intent, right? That mature collaboratives often have these MOUs in place among the partners we've discussed.
And I would say in particular, since this is a new program, an existing MOU may not include, most likely does not include all of the specifics of the K-16 program, because this is a new program. So if there are existing MOUs that really show the relationships, the roles and responsibilities of the collaborative partners, then that is the type of documentation that we would be looking for with the application.
There does seem to be a concern that funds will run out if they don't apply for phase 1. We just want to mention that there's a range of award amounts per region between 15 and 20 million, and they are set aside per region. So if a region is not awarded a grant in phase 1, that money will be there for phase 2 in that SURF region.
There's also an opportunity for recipients of the phase 1 grants, if there is something to be added to the collaborative, new partners, new scope of work, that application can be submitted in phase 2 for the additional scope and the additional work. It wouldn't generate another 15 to 20 million, but there may be a smaller proposal to expand that collaborative or the partners in that collaborative. So that might be an option if you're in an area that already has some well-established collaboratives, because the goal of the program is to not have the competition within the regions, but to be working together. So that's something that can be looked at as well. And I think we've addressed that in the FAQs also.
There's a question too about sort of the number of years for the grant, in particular for phase 2. So if you submit a phase 2 grant next year, would that be the same size as this year budget-wise? And then would the funding need to be spent over 3 remaining years of the program completed by 2026? The answer to that is yes. We do anticipate that the phase 2 implementation grants would be similar in size to the phase 1 grants, but it is correct that those milestones that need to be reached by 2024 and by 2026 apply to both the phase 1 and the phase 2 implementation grants. So we understand that obviously is a little bit more accelerated, but that is part of what was included in the Budget Act language that authorized this program.
Let's see.
There's another one, Beth, there's a question about the college to career platform. I'm wondering if this is something that you might be able to speak to just a little bit. What level of participation is required with the college to career platform? Will K-12 partners be expected to input student transcripts, and can these be uploaded from their existing databases?
I'm not going to talk about the technical aspects of the Cradle to Career platform, but CCGI is the element of the Cradle to Career platform that we are expecting K-12 partners to participate in. And you'll see both in the application question and in the scoring rubric that there's a level of participation expectation with different points awarded. So if you're fully in partnership with CCGI, California College Guidance Initiative, you will get more points, right, for your collaborative than if you've only had beginning conversations and maybe some demonstrations of their product, right? So the expectation in the long run is that every K-12 partner in the collaborative will be working with CCGI.
And I think we have time for maybe a couple more questions. And there's two similar questions related to elaborating on the required level of readiness of pathways at the time of application compared to something that collaborators plan to develop over time. And I would say that because, again, this is a new program, it may be that these pathways are not yet built out or are not yet in progress, or they could be. So I don't think we specified in the question a certain level of readiness of the pathways. But Beth, if you want, I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit more.
I think the mature pathways, the mature collaboratives who are applying in this phase, we're sort of expecting that you have some elements of the pathways in place, right? Maybe it's at one level of the educational partnerships, right? But maybe not all the way across K-12 into the workforce, right? So the intent is to complete the build out and streamline these pathways over the course of the grant period. But that's the purpose of the application, is for you to have a chance to outline how you will get that work done among the partners. So it is important that you have an idea about how that might work as you're creating your application. I think we've answered that question. Must all industry partners specifically align with our designated areas? That is not a specified requirement, but it would make for a very strong application to have industry partners that align with the pathways that you're choosing to work on. Will there be an opportunity?
I think we probably have time for maybe one more question. And then I do want to assure everyone that we are collecting these questions, both those that are put in the Q&A as well as in the chat. And we will be looking them over again to make sure we've captured them all. And we will probably be organizing them a little bit into common questions or common themes so that we can update the FAQs on the website probably within the next week or so. So I think we should wrap now since we are at the end of our time. Barbara, is there anything final that you'd like to say to wrap up?
No, just that we appreciate all the questions today. We're looking forward to working with everyone as the applications come in. And yeah, please use the website. There are definitely a lot of tools there, but if your question is not answered, feel free to send an email so that we can look into it more for you or communicate with you directly about the question. But yeah, thank you all for coming today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.